Shalom. The treasure of the Lord is just waiting to be discovered. So let's take our Bibles and turn to Numbers chapter 17. We're going to begin reading in verse 8. On the next day Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds, and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. Then Moses brought out all the staffs from before the Lord to all the people of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his staff. The people had rebelled against the Lord by challenging the leadership of Moses and Aaron. It started back in chapter 16. There was a group of tribal leaders who had said, "We have just as much right to be leaders and heads of Israel as you do." But the Lord had put Moses and Aaron in the positions. It wasn't by their own aspirations or striving to be there. Well, the Lord had caused the ground to open up and swallow those rebels alive, and then it closed back up again, demonstrating that it was the hand of the Lord that had brought about this judgment, and the hand of the Lord that had put Moses and Aaron in the place of leadership. Well, when all the people had seen this, they are terrified, and the next day they come to Moses and Aaron, and they begin to murmur and complain that, "How dare you do this to these servants of the Lord?" Well, as a result of that, the Lord broke out against them, is in a sense of what had taken place. We read about it, that the Lord said, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." That's verse 45 of chapter 16. But here's what Moses and Aaron do. They fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer, put fire on it from off the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." So Aaron did so, and stopped the plague, because he stood, in verse 48, as he's making atonement for the people, that he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Well, the Lord then instructs Moses to tell the heads of each of the tribes to bring their staves before the Lord, and for the tribe of Levi, Aaron would be represented, and that they were to put those staves in front of, after writing their names on it or carving their names on the staff, that they shall deposit or place them, in verse 4, in the tent of meeting before the testimony where I meet with you. He said, "The staff of the man whom I choose shall sprout, and this will make to cease from me the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against you." So the Lord said, "I'm going to show who is the one that I have appointed and approved for the work of atonement." And he says the staff that sprouts will be the indication of the one whom I have put in this place. Well, we read at the very beginning of our time that it was Aaron's staff that it not only sprouted, but it put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. So obviously this was a branch, a staff from an almond tree. But what significance do we see here about almonds and almond trees? Well, let's have a look at an almond tree. This is in Israel, from a trip that Debbie and I, my wife and I, took 4 years ago, and had this picture taken in front of the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. And the picture here is that the almond tree is the first of the trees to blossom in Israel, indicating that this is the harbinger of trees that are going to come into life and sprouting themselves. So when you see the almond tree begin to blossom, you know that all the trees are going to begin to blossom shortly thereafter. So we see that on this branch, on this rod, so it's an old branch, it's dead, but the Lord causes it to produce blossoms, buds, and fully ripe almonds. This speaks of life and power of life. Resurrection life is what this speaks of. Notice that the staff was just a regular staff. And then the next morning when they went to check it out, it has sprouted. Here's what the Lord tells them to do. In verse 10, after they looked and each man took his staff, then the Lord said to Moses, put back the staff of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign for the rebels, that you may make an end of their grumblings against me, lest they die. Thus did Moses, as the Lord commanded him, so did he. So we have the Ark of the Testimony once again, and placed inside it now is Aaron's rod that had sprouted with the buds, blossoms, and fully ripe almonds. And so by this point in time, now we have the tablets of the testimony, we have the rod that budded, and the jar of manna, the omer of manna that the Lord had told them to be a testimony before these generations. Now, the treasure. Let's go into the book of John, and we're going to look at verse 19. Do you remember what happened when Aaron had gone with that censer? He had made atonement, and he stopped wrath, the wrath of God being poured out upon the people. We'll have a look at this. So that stick, that dead stick, came to life. It represented what's taking place here with Yeshua, with Jesus. John 19, and in verse 17, they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of a skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. So here is Jesus nailed to this cross. Then we see a little while later in verse 30, when Jesus had received some sour wine, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head, and he gave up his spirit. Since it was the preparation day, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken so that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and they broke the legs of the first criminal on one side of Jesus. Then they broke the legs of the other on the opposite side of Jesus. But when they came to him in verse 33, that they saw that he was already dead and did not break his legs. Then down in verse 38, we see Joseph of Arimathea had asked permission to bury Jesus in his own tomb, which had recently been cut out of the rock, a place that no body had yet been laid. So Jesus, the first one. And so they took him and laid him in this new tomb. But on the 3rd day, when they come back, you may recall from a former episode that place where Jesus lay, his body had laid, was a representation of that mercy seat, the atonement cover, the kaporet, the cherubim on either side. And when they went to the tomb the next day, 3 days later, on the first day of the week, that they saw that the tomb was empty. And in verse 11, Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said, "Why are you weeping?" She said, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they have laid him." So she then has an encounter with the resurrected Jesus, that which was certain death in this dead tree, as it were, that all of a sudden on that 3rd day it sprouts with new life, with resurrection life, so that it blossomed and it budded and it produced full, ripe fruit, ripe almonds, where Jesus was resurrected from the dead. Now, I want us to see one last thing in Numbers chapter 18. So right on the heels of having placed the rod that budded before the testimony, then we see this, and you shall keep guard over the sanctuary regarding Aaron and over the altar, that there may never again be wrath on the people of Israel. So to make intercession for them. The problem is that Aaron would die, and then his sons would succeed him, but then they would die, and their work would never be done. But I want us to go to one more place. It's in the book of Hebrews, in the Brit Hadashah. Hebrews chapter 7. Aaron stepped in and he made intercession for the people. He stopped the wrath. He made atonement for the people. Now I want you to see this. Verse 20. And it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one, referring to Jesus, was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, quoting Psalm 110, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, a priest after the order of Melchizedek." This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But Jesus holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. In other words, he does not die. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. And continuing to read in the book of Hebrews, we see that he went in to that most holy place in the presence of God in heaven, and he made atonement for us. And now he sits at the right hand of majesty on high. And his life is the means by which we live. The tree of life, the cross, made evident to us through the empty tomb. Praise his name.